For most people, the words rich and powerful feel interchangeable. If someone has billions of dollars, we assume they control the world. If someone owns companies, yachts, and private jets, we imagine they also control governments, wars, and history. But wealth and power are not the same thing. In fact, history shows something far more uncomfortable. Many of the richest people who ever lived were never truly powerful, and many of the most powerful people in history were never rich at all. To understand the difference, we have to strip away modern illusions. Today's culture equates visibility with control. Social media, business magazines, and billionaire rankings make wealth look like dominance. But money is only a tool. Power is the ability to shape outcomes even when you don't own the tools. Power is influence without permission. In ancient societies, power came first. Wealth followed. Kings didn't become kings because they were rich. They became rich because they were kings. Pharaohs, emperors, and conquerors controlled land, laws, and violence. Gold flowed toward them naturally. Wealth was a consequence of authority, not the source of it. The richest merchants in ancient Rome could buy luxury, but they could not command legions. Senators could vote. Generals could decide life and death. The merchant class, no matter how wealthy, always stood below real power. This pattern repeated for centuries. In medieval Europe, land was power. Whoever controlled land controlled food. Whoever controlled food controlled people. Wealthy traders existed, but they depended on kings for protection, access, and legal recognition. A merchant could lose everything overnight if a ruler changed his mind. Power did not need money. Money needed power. Then something subtle began to change. As trade expanded and empires grew more complex, rulers needed systems they could not personally manage. Armies required financing. Wars required credit. Empires required logistics. This is where wealth and power began to separate into two different forces. Rulers still held authority, but they increasingly relied on those who controlled money flows. This dependency created a quiet shift. The people who funded wars began influencing which wars could be fought. The people who lent money to states began shaping the survival of states themselves. But even then, wealth alone was not power. It was leverage, and leverage only works if the system depends on you. History is full of wealthy individuals who believed their money made them untouchable, only to discover how wrong they were. Nobles seized assets. Kings canceled debts. Revolutions wiped out fortunes overnight. Wealth that depends on a ruler's tolerance is fragile. True power does not ask for tolerance. Power operates differently. Power designs rules instead of obeying them. Power decides which institutions survive and which collapse. Power does not panic during crises, because crises often increase its influence, while the wealthy worry about markets. The powerful influence policy, while the wealthy protect assets. The powerful shape systems. This difference becomes clearer when we examine modern times. A billionaire can lose half his wealth in a financial crash. A powerful institution often grows stronger during the same crash. When markets collapse, governments intervene. When governments intervene, those closest to policy gain influence. Wealth fluctuates, power stabilizes. Another illusion is that public recognition equals control. The richest individuals are often highly visible. Their names appear on rankings and headlines. But visibility can be a weakness. Power often prefers anonymity. Many of history's most influential actors operated behind institutions, not personal brands. Central banks, regulatory bodies, financial frameworks, and international agreements shape the world quietly. Their influence doesn't trend, it persists. There is also a difference in time horizons. Wealth often thinks in quarters and years. Power thinks in decades and generations. Wealth chases growth. Power manages continuity. Wealth can be inherited and squandered. Power is preserved through structure. Families that remained influential for centuries did not rely solely on money. They embedded themselves into systems that outlived individual fortunes. Perhaps the most important distinction is this: wealth reacts. Power anticipates. When inflation rises, the wealthy adjust portfolios. When inflation rises, power redesigns monetary rules. When crises hit, the wealthy ask what will happen. Power already helped decide what would happen. This is why some people with unimaginable wealth still feel insecure, while others with modest public wealth shape entire nations. Power does not need to be seen. It only needs to be felt. Understanding this difference changes how you view history, economics, and modern society. It explains why financial collapses often increase inequality instead of reducing it. It explains why new billionaires appear every decade, but the same institutions remain in control, and it explains why chasing wealth alone rarely leads to real influence. In the next chapter, we will examine how modern systems transform this divide even further, and how financial structures created a class that doesn't just own money, but quietly governs the rules around it. When people talk about wealth, they often imagine freedom, big houses, private jets, influence. The assumption is simple. If someone is rich enough, they must also be powerful. But history shows something very different. Wealth and power are not the same force. In fact, they often work against each other. And the difference between the two explains why some billionaires quietly disappear from history, while others shape the fate of nations without ever appearing on a rich list. To understand this difference, you have to stop thinking about money as a number and start thinking about money as a position. Inside a system, rich people usually own things. Powerful people control systems. Ownership can be bought. Control has to be designed, protected, and hidden throughout history. The richest individuals were often visible. They built palaces, funded art, sponsored wars, and displayed their success openly. But visibility is a weakness. The moment wealth becomes obvious, it becomes a target. Kings taxed it, rivals attacked it, revolutions seized it. Rich people had assets, but they were exposed assets. Land could be taken, gold could be confiscated, titles could be revoked. Powerful people learned from this. Instead of owning things directly, they positioned themselves where decisions were made. They didn't need to own the land if they controlled the rules that decided who could use it. They didn't need to own the gold if they influenced the institutions that defined what money was worth. This is where the separation begins. A rich person depends on stability. Markets must function. Laws must protect property. Currency must hold value. A powerful person, however, can survive instability and sometimes even benefits from it. When systems break, wealth often evaporates, but power can reorganize itself inside the chaos. Look at financial history. During major collapses, crashes, and wars, fortunes are destroyed almost overnight, but the institutions that set interest rates, restructure debt, and negotiate bailouts often emerge stronger. People closest to those levers rarely appear on rich lists, yet their decisions move trillions of dollars. Power operates through leverage, not balance sheets. Leverage over governments, over regulations, over information, over timing. A powerful individual doesn't need to be the richest person in the room. They only need to be the one everyone else depends on when the system freezes. Another key difference is time horizon. Rich people often think in years or decades. Powerful people think in generations. Wealth seeks growth. Power seeks continuity. That's why some families remain influential for centuries even when their visible wealth rises and falls. They adapt. They move capital across borders. They shift industries. They stay close to institutions, not trends. There's also a psychological difference. Wealth gives comfort. Power demands restraint. The more powerful someone becomes, the less they can afford attention. True power avoids headlines. It prefers advisory roles, private meetings, and indirect influence. It works quietly because exposure creates resistance. This is why many extremely wealthy individuals fail to convert money into lasting power. They assume influence comes from spending, donations, or visibility. But power doesn't respond to noise, it responds to structure. Without control over systems, wealth remains fragile. History is full of examples where rich elites were removed, replaced, or erased, while the underlying power network survived untouched. Regimes changed, currencies collapsed, borders shifted, but the systems that managed debt, trade, and governance quietly adapted and continued operating. Understanding this difference changes how to see the world today when you watch financial news, political drama, or corporate scandals. Ask a different question. Don't ask who is the richest. Ask who cannot afford to fail. Ask who gets rescued when everything breaks. Ask whose interests are protected by the rules themselves. That's where power lives. And that's why being rich can buy comfort, but only power buys permanence. Power doesn't announce itself the way wealth does. That's the mistake most people make when they try to understand who really runs the world. By the time you can clearly see power, it has already finished its work. In the modern world, wealth is visible. It leaves trails. Mansions, yachts, rankings, headlines, and public fortunes. Rich people are measured, listed, celebrated, criticized. Their numbers rise and fall in public view. Power works differently. Power avoids measurement. It hides behind systems, rules, institutions, and decisions that appear neutral, technical, or inevitable. This is where the difference between being rich and being powerful becomes impossible to ignore. A rich person owns money. A powerful person shapes the environment in which money operates. A billionaire can lose half their fortune in a market crash. A powerful institution can cause the crash, survive it, and profit from the recovery. Wealth reacts. Power initiates. Throughout history, the richest individuals were not always the ones deciding outcomes. During financial crises, wars, currency collapses, and economic resets, the loudest names are often victims, not architects. Fortunes disappear, but the rules that allowed those fortunes to exist remain untouched. That is not an accident. It is design. Power lives inside leverage, legal leverage, political leverage, financial leverage, narrative leverage. Consider how laws are written. Most people assume laws are responses to public needs. In reality, many laws are frameworks that determine who can access capital, who can borrow cheaply, who can move money across borders, and who cannot. Those who influence these frameworks don't need to be the richest. They need to be positioned, close to decision-making channels, central banks, regulatory bodies, international institutions, advisory committees, and legacy financial networks quietly shape outcomes long before markets react. This is why some families, institutions, and financial houses remain influential for centuries while individual fortunes rise and fall. Around them, they don't chase profit. They preserve position. When power is working correctly, it looks boring. Meetings instead of speeches, policy drafts instead of headlines, risk models instead of revolutions. The most powerful actors rarely need public approval. Because they operate above electoral cycles and beyond popular attention, they influence the long game while others fight over short-term wins. This is also why power avoids ownership. Ownership creates visibility. Visibility attracts scrutiny. Instead, power prefers control without direct possession, influence without responsibility, decision-making without attribution. A powerful entity doesn't need to own a company if it controls credit access. It doesn't need to own media if it influences advertising flows and regulatory boundaries. It doesn't need to command armies if it controls supply chains, energy pricing, and currency stability. Power has learned that force is expensive. Incentives are cheaper. Modern power understands psychology better than force ever did. It knows people obey systems they believe are neutral. Algorithms, interest rates, credit scores, compliance rules, risk assessments. These feel objective, technical, and unavoidable. But every system reflects priorities chosen by someone, and those priorities determine who wins quietly and who struggles publicly. Wealth often wants recognition. Power prefers anonymity. This difference explains why some extremely rich individuals still fear political shifts, regulatory changes, or currency resets. They understand that money without power is temporary. Meanwhile, those who shape the rules can survive multiple economic eras without ever appearing on a rich list. In moments of crisis, this distinction becomes brutally clear. When economies crash, governments scramble, and currencies weaken. Rich individuals ask how to protect their assets. Powerful institutions ask how to redesign the system. One reacts defensively, the other reorganizes reality. Power also understands timing. It doesn't rush. It waits for moments when resistance is lowest. Crises create urgency. Urgency weakens scrutiny. Emergency policies pass faster than debated ones. Once systems are in place, they rarely reverse fully. Power accumulates not through dramatic conquest, but through permanent adjustments made during temporary fear. This is why studying money alone is not enough. To understand the real hierarchy of the world, you must study incentives, governance, credit creation, legal frameworks, and institutional memory. Wealth is a result. Power is the cause. And here is the most uncomfortable truth. Power does not need to be evil to be dangerous. It simply needs to be insulated from consequences. When decision makers are protected from the outcomes of their decisions, systems drift away from public interest and toward self-preservation, not out of malice, but out of structure. The difference between rich and powerful is not morality, it is distance. Distance from risk, distance from accountability, distance from loss. The richest people can fall. The powerful are positioned so that when things fall, they fall upward. Understanding this difference changes how you see headlines, markets, and history itself. It forces a harder question, not who has the most money, but who decides what money is allowed to do. Because in the end, wealth lives inside the system. Power builds the system.